Let's talk about level design and why RPG Maker games don't sell. Why don't they? Even the good RPG Maker games don't tend to sell very well. Is it something wrong with RPG Maker? Not really. I'd argue that it's something wrong with pixel art. Not that pixel art is bad, but that it has some weaknesses that you need to be aware of if you plan to make a game using pixel art. The big weakness in this case is that when you take a screenshot of a pixel art game and you post it to, say, Twitter, it gets resized and your pixel art turns into garbage. The beautiful portrait you drew, pink blob. The cool line you made them say to prove that you know how to write, white blob. The painstaking tile-by-tile effort that you put into the overworld, green blob. Yeah, they can't see it, and if the player can't see what makes your game worth playing, they're not going to play your game. This isn't just a marketing problem. The human eye only sees what's directly in front of it in clarity. Everything around that is blurry. It's the nature of human vision. We think everything is sharp all the time because our eyes move incredibly fast, but the truth is that most of the screen is blurry. So whether you're posting your screenshots to Twitter or to the human eye, your game is going to be mostly blurry. And that is a level design constraint. It's also a character design constraint and a battle map constraint, but we're going to focus on level design right now. I'd argue that this is the #1 understated constraint in pixel art games. Nobody really talks about this, although a lot of the advice that you're given helps with this. But we're going to talk about this specifically, and I argue that if you follow three basic rules, three basic approaches, you can keep your games looking great even when they're blurry, and it will make your games sparkle when they are thumbnails, or when a human eye is looking at them, and that's kind of what you want, because most of your players have human eyes. So, what are the 3 rules? Well, the first rule is have a color palette. You need to decide on a color palette for each region before you start to create the region, and the color palette needs to suit the region. It needs to fit what you want the region to be about. Now, in general, when you're making an RPG Maker game, you use the default palette that is associated with the default tiles that you're using. So you're like, trees are green, there's a green tree, and then of course you got gray mountains, right? That's your color palette for the overworld. There are other colors in there, but these are the dominant two. It's like, I suppose you can go like to the desert and have a yellow sands and some other, something else that's gray. Everyone likes gray, right? Well, I'd like to argue that you shouldn't have green trees, and you shouldn't have green grass, and you shouldn't have gray mountains. Sounds a little strange, doesn't it? I'm not talking about Fantasyland, because a purple tree isn't fantastic, not as far as you might think. A purple tree is just a tree at night. Grass can be gold. Why not? There's nothing wrong with the idea of gold grass. It's actually just as common as green grass. Mountains can be orange because maybe they're under the moonlight. There are so many things you can do here, and you don't have to keep all of your colors the same just because your sprites are like that by default. Even if you're not making your own sprite, it's incredibly easy to go and duplicate the sprite sheet and then download any program you'd like. GIMP can do it. And then you just go over and you do tonal correction, hue, and then you can drag around the hue until it matches the palette that you're trying to create. And you can also change the saturation. You can let the whole sheet change. You can just select a couple of tiles. It's very easy. You don't need to be some kind of master artist to do it. And it will make your game look great because color survives resizing. It survives blurriness. So if you have a patch of color on your world map, it's going to get seen by everybody, regardless of how blurry or small or badly damaged your picture is. They're going to see that color. It's important that all of your various places have different colors, different palettes, because you're often going to be posting several screenshots at once, and you want people to realize that your game is vibrant. Your game has a lot of different areas. So just as an example, if you are doing a world scene at night, there is a temptation to do like just normal tree green and normal mountain gray, and then just darken it down with 50% blend of black, right? That's a normal. You put over a 50% black shadow across the whole scene. Hey, you're done. Please don't. Consider instead that your trees would look a lot better if they were shifted into purple. And your mountains would look pretty good shifted into, orangey yellow. You can make any colors you'd like. Nobody is going to complain that your color palette is too exciting. If people wake up in the morning and they get out of the inn and yawn and they see that all of the trees are pink, they're not going to go, oh, my immersion is broken. Trees are green. They're going to think, oh, that's looking pretty neat. I wonder why they're pink. Is it the sun shining off of them or whatever? I mean, it's possible that your players will say, hey, this is dumb, but it's highly unlikely. Most players will really, really appreciate a new palette, a new thing for their eyes to see. So, please, number one, use distinct colors and don't reuse the same palettes everybody else uses. Avoid green trees, because everybody uses green trees. If you take a screenshot of a green tree, nobody is going to care. It's just going to be a blurry green tree, just like every other game that has ever come out. But a blurry purple tree, maybe that'll hold a little bit of interest. Anyway, step 2. Repeating motifs. So the core issue here is that you need to create things that look good when they're blurry. And the easiest way to think about that is if you have like these complex pixel art tiles that get repeated over and over, you can think of each one of those as a single blurry pixel, or maybe 2x2 blurry pixels, because that's basically how it works, right? Your beautiful pixel art, when it's blurry, it just becomes a blob of color like a pixel. So if you think of it in that way, it's possible for you to try and come up with something that will look good even when it's blurry. And once you find something that feels compelling, you should reuse it. You can try and come up with a million different things, but in general, a repeating motif is very strong. So just as an example, here we're on a world map, okay? And here is our hero wandering around the world map. How do we want to make the world map look distinct? Well, we could have green trees and green grass, but that's not really very interesting. We could also have purple trees. That's better. But really the best thing we can do is to have something interesting going on. For example, maybe there are broken pieces of statuary scattered around, and they're huge. They're giant pieces of statuary all around the world map, right? And, there's trees. There's some moss growing on them, right? And it's a repeating motif. So you have other pieces of statue in various places all around the world map. And you can get all sorts of fun visuals out of this. And because they are so big, they look decent when they are blurry. They still look like hands and feet and faces when they're blurry, because they're big enough that actually works out. And because of that, these make great repeating motifs, because you have character, you have the player will look at it and they'll say, oh, look at that world map. It's covered in huge broken statues. What's up with that? What's the story there? Are there intact statues? Can they move? Did the people who make those statues make something else? Why did they break? What was it like back when they weren't broken? These are great. That's a very strong motif because it immediately strikes the player as something worth looking at. Now, obviously, this would require custom art, and I don't mean that you should always just use giant statues. Anything will work as long as it is something that the player immediately recognizes. Another thing you might try to do is just use tiles in particular formats, but this is a little bit risky and it requires a lot of thought. For example, let's say that you decided that your repeating motif is rings of lava. So here's a whole bunch of lava rings, right? The problem is that the lava rings don't have any sort of compelling thing to the player. The player doesn't go, ooh, lava rings, awesome. Instead they go, why is the ground covered in blurry red crap? So if you're going to do something like that, you have to try your best to make it something that the player will be able to immediately recognize and then use it in variations. Repeat in variation. That is the core of the repeating motif philosophy. So for example, instead of having rings of magma, you might have like a huge magma lake up here, and then you have these huge magma rivers coming out of it. And now this seems like it's, it's pretty basic, right? Just magma lakes and magma rivers. Yeah, but this is actually not a bad idea. This is a repeating motif, and it will make sure that the player, any player who sees this map, even when it's blurry, will immediately know, look at that, this world is on fire. And maybe you can do some cool stuff like, there's a waterfall here, and it comes plunging down, and this whole area is covered in steam, and you can't actually go there until you divert the river and flow it down this way so that the steam will vanish. These are really compelling ideas, and they're not hard to come up with. Anything can be made into a repeating motif as long as you can find anything that is compelling when blurry. And a lava river, that's pretty compelling when blurry. It doesn't have to be anything even, striking, though. You can just use basic everyday stuff. For example, if you wanted a repeating motif for a village, let's say you just a pastoral village thing, right? Now here's the village down here. How can we make the world map around the village striking, even though there's just a village? There's a little river, little road running across the village, maybe a river. But really, that's not very striking. Why not cover it in wildflowers? So you got like vibrant purple wildflowers all around this area, and you got some golden flowers here and out here. And now you're getting vibrant. And that's something that's acceptable. Nobody's going to think, flowers on my world map? No, but the key here is that these flowers are not decorations. They're dominant. Because when the scene is blurry, you need to see gold and purple, not green. So these flowers need to be really overdone, but that's the thing. In this pastoral setting, overdone flowers fit right in. So what I'm trying to get at here is you can find something in any setting, even a pastoral, gentle setting. You can find something that will make the player go, oh, I need to go there. I need to see those things. I need to click this mouse-shaped little thumbnail and blow it up into full size because I want to know what's going on. That's the whole point. So this is obviously a combination here. I'm using the color palette of the area and the idea of a repeating motif, because the color palette is fundamentally a repeating motif. I'm just employing it in specific ways. I hope you understood that, because the third one is that you're going to want to use framing. Framing is a very simple concept. It's very similar to what we've already covered, except that it actually directs players. So you've got all of these beautiful shapes that look good blurry, and you're repeating the same formations of rooms or flowers or statues or whatever in variation, so the player gets a sense that this place exists and looks great and has a purpose. But if the player doesn't know where to go, that's all pointless. So when you are creating your world map and you got your little adventurer, well, you want them to go to a village. How do you get them to go to a village? Well, you could just put the 1x1 village icon in here, the default village icon in the old version of RPG Maker was just a 1x1 world tile. You can do that, but I got bad news. That's blurry. They're not going to see it. So what are you going to do instead? Well, the idea of framing is that you create a repeated set of shapes that guide the player. It's a repeated motif, but it's specifically to guide the player instead of to just impact the eye. Let's go ahead and give you an example. Instead of just having a random city, let's go ahead and build a city that has a shape that looks good when we are looking at it from afar. So we'll give it a horseshoe shape, right? So here's a whole bunch of little houses. You can't see them very well because I'm drawing fast, but, you know, they're houses. And they'll put a big castle here because that's cool. Always cool, right? Fantasy castles. Right? Cool. So now it's a U shape, and it's like a red-gray U shape because that's the color of the roofs of the houses and the brick. So that's cool. If you squint at this, you're going to see a red-gray U shape, and you're going to say, that's kind of interesting, and naturally you're going to go towards the inside of this U shape. But we're going to want to repeat this motif, so we're also going to create a wall around this town. And now we've got a gray wall around our red castle, and it's the same basic shape, so we've got a U within a U, and we can keep doing this. So here's forest in a U shape. And there we are. We've got a little road coming out. And now we've got a U within a U within a U. And you might think this is overdone, but it's really not. In fact, this is like minimum. For an important thing, you need to make it so that it's really clear. Let's go ahead and keep going, because what we can also do is put it near a water area. So now we've got a U within a U within a U within a U. And we can add in some details that are less important, like we can put a broken bridge up here. And the player's not intended to be drawn to that bridge initially. That's like a secondary objective. They're supposed to see it and notice it later on. And, you know, we can put a little bit of a port maybe down here. And the point here is that we don't have just the point of interest. There's other stuff going on. But the point of interest is what gets all the attention. That's because it's a point of interest. And how big is this on our screen? It's half the screen. Yeah. An important point of interest should take up half the screen if your map scrolls. So that sounds like a lot, but it's really not, because we're not talking about the city taking up half a screen. We're talking about all of the stuff that leads to the city taking up half a screen. And this forest isn't just a magical forest. It's not like the city is ringed by 3 things that are magic unicorn events. There's forests and walls all over this continent, so it's just stuff that happens to be here as well, and it's just in a formation that draws the eye. And you might think, oh, really? Is this really a good way to do a city? I mean, aren't people going to be really thinking that's overbearing? I mean, it's half a screen of random crap leading to the city. I don't know. That sounds like it's too much. Well, as it turns out, I can tell you what's in this city. I can tell you what the first person you talk to says. They say, welcome to Corneria. Because this is the first fantasy city I ever encountered in an RPG. This is the starting town from Final Fantasy I. And that's just exactly it. I mean, if you look up screenshots, that's it right there. So this is something that is already very, very well established. I'm not inventing this. And if you look at any Final Fantasy world map, you're going to see the same basic idea. They circle all of the important things. They use a repeated motif to try and draw you to the important cities and the important dungeons. Now, you don't have to just circle. That's not the only kind of repeated motif. For example, if we had our little hamlet and we decided that we wanted to draw the player into it, how are we going to draw the player in? And what sort of shape do we want to use to do that? We don't have to circle the hamlet. We could instead choose to do something else. For example, we could put in like tick marks of farms with little farmhouses here. And because they're shaped specifically like tick marks, carrots, they have a repeated shape that feels very appealing, and we can use it to direct the player towards the destination because they'll quickly see that they are all aligned in a specific way. And it might feel a little bit fake to you when you're building it, but it won't feel fake to the player when they're actually watching it and walking through it. It'll make sense. Yeah, of course they've got farms outside of the village. And the same repeating motif, you could expand it. You could have like a forest over here, for example, which could have the same basic tick mark, and maybe some mountains over here with the same basic idea. And it's not going to feel very forced. It's not going to feel like your world is fake. It's astonishing how flexible people are in just accepting random repeating formations. So, you can go ahead and use any motif you like, and unless you actually hear players complain that it is a little bit overdone, you can assume it's not, because they are willing to accept far more than you give them credit for. And that includes having literal arrows pointing to the town. So those are the 3 basic rules I recommend if you're doing a pixel art game. You want to make sure that every single screen, when you're looking at it blurry, uses these 3 basic tools so that even a blurry version of it will still look great and have impact and feel interesting. And the 3 tools, in case you've forgotten, are color palettes, repeating motifs, and framing. Now, if you want, you can look up any of these and get a lot more information. These are not like pixel art specific topics. For example, framing, there is a huge amount of knowledge about how to frame art. And I don't mean like with wooden frames. I mean how to put framing into your pictures. And all of that stuff will work for your level design. There's a lot of cross-platform stuff going on here, and you can read up on anything and take inspiration from it. Similarly, color palettes. Any method of choosing a good color palette will work. In case you've never worked with color palettes before, the basic, most fundamental thing you can do is you just choose a high saturation color and a low saturation color, and you choose a bright and a dark. So if you were going to, you would take, for example, this high saturation bright orange, and you would mix it with usually something that's almost directly across from it that's more gray and dark. So in this case, it would be this orange and this blue. Or you might do a dark but high saturation purple for your midnight trees. And then you would do a cheery, bright but mostly gray green. And that will guaranteed work. But if you are feeling more experimental, by all means look up color palettes. There are literally millions and millions of articles and essays and helpers to help you figure out how you want your color palettes to look. I hope this has helped, and I hope it was interesting. Have a good one.